This is Joe Wong. Welcome to the Trap Set. During the age of social distancing, we're recording remotely and releasing episodes every day. Today's guest is Billy Conway. Billy began his recording career with Boston band Treat Her Right, and later achieved international recognition as the drummer of the band Morphine. For the past couple decades, Billy has also been active as a producer. In recent years, he's collaborated extensively with songwriter Jeffrey Foucault. Billy spoke to me from his home in Montana.
Able to say, I'm still see full of memory. On my dying day, I'm able to say, I'm able to say, you know, I finally see things all your way.
Hi, Billy. How are you?
I'm okay.
That sounds working? Great. Yeah, it sounds great.
Okay. I'll try to not wander about.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in southern Minnesota. I was born in Iowa, but I grew up in southern Minnesota mostly. I lived up in Superior for a little bit. My family moved around, but just that neighborhood.
Were your parents musical people?
No. It is one of the wonders of my musical life in that I can tell you without flinching that I never heard the word artist. And I didn't really know, nobody in my family played music. So what happened to me is just must have been stored up somewhere in the gene pool. Yeah, it was a pretty easy thing for me. And they made it simple. They were good parents, let me have drums in the basement, and they went about their life, you know.
So that was your first instrument, drums?
Yep.
Was there music on in the house when you were growing up?
Oh, man, my parents they loved to dance, and they listened to the best Ellington, Basie, and that kind of stuff, and we're prone to dancing in the kitchen. But when it came to my music, they just kind of let me do my thing, and it was only when I got older that I said, wow, why didn't you make me listen to these Ellington records you have, you know?
It usually doesn't work if someone makes you listen to something, right?
No, I was just exactly. I was too naive to go, wow, that's pretty cool. You know, I was busy with John Bonham, you know.
How did you find John Bonham? The radio?
Yeah, exactly. The radio. And, you know, small town in the Midwest, we had a record store, and whatever knowledge the guy had, you'd go down and bug him until you learned something. But mostly, you know, at that stage of the game, records were 3 for $10. So I'd always go down and buy 2 that I knew about or had read about or was curious, and then 1 if I liked the cover, you know.
Yeah, what are some that you can remember buying just because of the cover?
There was a Vanilla Fudge record that I bought because of the cover. Yeah.
We had Carmine on this show a few years back.
Wow.
Fudge. What an interesting guy.
I'm sure. Geez, quite a career. Yeah. Didn't he do some work with Beck along the way among many people?
Jeff Beck, yeah.
Yeah.
And he had a band called Cactus as well.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
And then he played in Rod Stewart's band during the 80s.
Yeah. Yeah. Was that the period when Rod was doing the classics? When
he was doing the Do You Think I'm Sexy era.
Oh, yeah. Ouch. Well, only because I am such a fan of the Faces, and especially those early solo records, you know, were great. Gasoline Alley, Never a Dull Moment, and man, it's just some beautiful records.
Well, the interesting thing about that Do You Think I'm Sexy song is that it was half of the hook was stolen from a Brazilian artist, and Rod ended up having to pay out on that one.
That's a kind of divine justice, isn't it?
I guess. Wait, so I'm curious, if you're parents weren't musicians and there weren't any other musicians in your immediate circle, how did you find drums and how did you first connect to the instrument?
Well, in those days, the music thing for a grade school was they'd put the instruments in the gymnasium, and then you'd go down and you get to walk around and toot and bang and try them all out, and then pick one if you wanted to participate. And then the school would provide you with an instrument and some lessons, and then you'd join the school band. So it was, small town. It was a pretty easy thing to do. Get involved with that, and I don't know, by the time I was in 7th grade, we had a little combo, and I think played our first gig,
A school combo?
No, a little rock band, And it's really funny, I just been in touch with a couple of the guys from that band. So in a really small town, it was like 15,000 tops. There were only a handful of people that played music. But of the 5 of us that put together this little band, 4 of us went on to just make music our careers. And
That's wild.
And the one who didn't still plays all the time, but we kind of lost track of him because he was a carpenter and he was a bass player and he lost his index finger on his right hand.
Wow.
So, but he, had to take some time off and we all went our separate ways, but now he lives back in Minnesota and he plays all the time. So for whatever reasons, it wasn't like we were auditioning the best guitar player. It was the only one. And yet everybody made careers of it, Pretty amazing.
Was it your ambition early on to make a career of it?
No, I never looked at it like that. I always just played. Whenever there was a chance to play and people to play with, I did. And it really wasn't until much later in my 20s that I was playing so much music that my job, which was teaching inner city school kids, I kind of had to choose. So I never took the course of like how to become a musician. It was just something that I always did. And at a certain point, it became a profession.
Did it feel like it was central to your identity when you were playing with that rock band, or was it just a hobby like anything else?
Well, I think, you had Midwestern parents breathing down your neck that, this is fun, but, you have to have a fallback. That was always what I heard.
Sure, so did I.
And and you do. I used to give the working musician lecture at Berkeley sometimes, and I would tell them, write classic thing, put a line down the middle of the paper, put artist on one side, musician, and on the other side, put gas jockey, house painter, school teacher, investment broker. These are all the things you're going to do, to feed that other habit till it starts to work out for you.
Right. If it works out for you.
If it does. And for me...
Or the other way of looking at it is it can work out for you in a creative sense. It can be working out and still not producing an income.
Oh, yeah. And
like whether or not you're earning an income doesn't necessarily determine whether it's working out, right?
Absolutely. No. And I think, the world is full of us that we play no matter what. That's what we do. So I've never, when I think about it, never not been involved with something where I'm playing. And it was I'm sure lots of artists discuss whether it's a compulsion, an addiction, affliction, whatever the case may be. If it feeds you in a healthy way, play on.
Yeah, and it's not always so binary. I mean, sometimes it feels healthy and unhealthy.
Oh,
like it's like ruining my life and enriching my life.
Well, yeah, and over time, being an elder in this operation now, I talk to people of my ilk. Bo Ramsey, for example, the guitar player, is an old pal, and we always have this discussion about, are you playing too much or not enough? Because if you're too much, sometimes that wears on you, And if you're not enough, then you're not on your game, which wears on you, because there's nothing more frustrating than to have an idea you can't articulate because you've been on the bench for a while,
So how would you answer that question? Like, what's enough for you?
I feel really fortunate in that for pretty much all of my career, I've had enough. And because I'm always gigging enough that I kind of yearn for more time to explore on my own at home. And then sometimes you get off the road and you just don't do that, That discipline sometimes gets washed out. But yeah, so, well, the past 10 years with Jeffrey Foucault, we've been gigging, 10 to 14 days a month. That's kind of how he does it. Because, Jeff's got Hazel and Chris, she's got her own career. So he would kind of like go out for 2 weekends tops and then work our way, fill in during the week.
And
But
that feels like a perfect amount for
well,
you.
yeah, that was working out pretty nicely for us, So what we would do is just fly to, the Pacific Northwest, fly to Seattle, play 10 shows, go home, and then meet in Nashville and play 10 shows in that neighborhood.
That's a great thing about being a duo is the agility that it offers.
And it was the same with Morphine, I'll never forget, Morphine was doing the Jules Holland show one time, and I think Stevie Winwood was getting back together with the whole gang.
With Traffic?
And yeah, but they had mutated into, it was a bigger outfit, and there were more players. And he walked into our dressing room, and it was just the three of us sitting there quiet like, and sat down and goes, man, I remember what it was like to be in a trio. But that, we were a trio kind of out of experience too. We had learned to strip it back. When the band before Morphine was called Treat Her Right, and we'd all been in rock bands at this point and had too much gear, and so we decided we were going to put together this band, and the idea was you had to be able to carry your gear into the venue in one trip, and nobody needed help with anything. So you arrive at the gig and you walk in and do it.
I mean, that's a very intelligent way to avoid what will become arguments later on about who's helping carry in the gear.
Oh, yeah, and loading and everything. The idea was, hell, Muddy Waters and all this music we were trying to emulate with that band. That's how they did it, So we were using, setting our own parameters to force creativity out of it,
Right.
So our theory was if you could do that in one trip, you could play in somebody's living room or you could play the Enormo Dome. It didn't matter. But you were traveling easier and far more flexible. So the first tour we did of California, we threw our gear in the back of a big old Cadillac that Dave Alvin rented for us.
From the Blasters.
Yeah. And we toured like that. It was like pretty slick. So then when Morphine came, it was the same thing, So we were able to fly to gigs, if I rented a kit. So we could just fly to Paris and play 4 shows in France and then come home.
Right. Every time I've had to go over there, there's a whole backline situation that needs to be worked out months in advance, etc.
Yeah, no, and of course I was the one that always had a new kit every night. Mm-hmm. But you learn the better rental places, and it didn't take long to make sure I was getting playable gear,
Going back to the Midwest, you're growing up in Minnesota, and then did I hear correctly that you went to school at Yale?
Yep, I did.
What was your relationship to music by the time you went off to college?
I didn't bring drums. I brought a guitar. And you'll love this. The synchronicity is awesome. So I go there and I immediately find people to play with, playing guitar. And, we have a little bluegrass band, that kind of thing. But so for our sophomore year, 10 of us took one of these big suites that you could get if people can commit to it. And it was all musicians. And it was really astounding what we pulled together. There was a upright bass player, a jazz dude from New York. He was a mother, great bass player. Same with a piano player from New Jersey. He was a mother. And they played jazz. Then there was a kind of rock guitar player from Philadelphia, and a banjo player from Connecticut, and a harmonica player from San Francisco. I was the only drummer. So we set up our instruments in the, big living room that we shared. And we had a piano and a set of drums and a bunch of amps, and then we played. But being the only drummer, I would get behind the kid and the bluegrass guys would play, so I learned to play, roll along with the banjo. And then they'd take a break, and a couple of rock guys would come in, and we'd play some of that stuff. And then the jazz guys would come in, and I was not schooled. This was my schooling, these people. So I'd just get behind the kit and just swing a little bit with a ride cymbal and stay out of the way while these cats played. But I was learning the whole time. So I would, if I didn't have too much schoolwork, I would play from 7 o'clock until midnight, being the only drummer. Now, interestingly, of that group of people, and even at an Ivy League school, over half of those people turned into professional career musicians. Paul Coldery, the producer, did Radiohead and, that big Boston scene, the Fort Apache. He did a lot of those records. And the bass player went on to have his own small career, I guess, and everybody did. So it was a really, while I was going to school, I was getting this other education and all this music that, was not available to me in Owatonna, Minnesota,
You mentioned that you became a teacher after college. Were you studying education at Yale?
Yes, I did. I studied the history of education. So when I get to Boston and I had to, find some work, I just started teaching school at a inner city school that was it was rough. It was rough kids who'd been kicked out of public school forever. And this was their last stop before residential treatment, the school that I taught at. So it was tough kids, but it was rewarding work. I really liked it.
Before we get to that, I also heard that you were the captain of the ice hockey team when you were in school.
Yes, I was. Mm-hmm.
And
yep.
you even were offered a tryout to the Olympic team, were you not?
Well, because I was from Minnesota, Herb Brooks, who was the coach of that team, I'd known him since I was 14 years old. So, and I knew everybody on the team.
This is the Miracle on Ice team from the famous 1980 Olympics.
Yes, it is. Yeah. But I busted my knee right before we started. I mean, it was part of my plan. But I busted my knee all up and got my invitation delivered for that Olympic team, got delivered to my hospital room where my knee was elevated up over my head.
Did you see that as fate intervening and pointing you in the direction of being a musician?
Kane, that's very astute of you. One of the things I always struggled with was I'd read those and heard all of the adages about making plans and goals and all that kind of stuff. So I decided, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make that team. So I worked out all summer long up in Bemidji, Minnesota, and went to taught at a hockey school to try and stay on my game. Went back to college, was really on my game, and then I got mono. And I had to lay out for 2 months. And I remember thinking, okay, well, that didn't work out so good, but I'm going to still push it and see if I can, pull myself together before the season's out. And then I bust my knee up. So what I gleaned from all that was that making plans for me is not really that. I'm not made for that. I must be better at improvising.
Do you feel like you had improvised your life up until that point? I mean, it seems like going to an Ivy League school and so on requires a certain degree of planning.
Well, no, and it's interesting that you should ask that question because I'd been, I was a good player, so I was getting recruited by schools, and Yale had recruited me, but when I was a junior in high school. And I said to the guy, look, man, I'm not really making decisions right now. I got this year and I got next year to play. Well, somehow the guy misinterpreted that. So the following year, he sees me playing again. He says, are you doing an extra year? What's going on? I said, no, man. So it was kind of by happenstance. He said, well, let's see if we can fast track this. And, he got me, helped me get the admissions thing together and get in line. And, as far as Ivy League schools go, I was the perfect storm, a good student, a good athlete, and, lower middle class family. So for financial aid, I was kind of the perfect storm for them. They loved people like me. They could give financial aid to, and I have a track record that sort of said he's going to finish school, which is what they want more than anything. So
it also supports the narrative that one can pull himself up from his bootstraps.
Yeah, and to be honest, my high school counselor, told me not to apply. I'd never get in, which of course motivated me to do it all myself and then throw the acceptance letter on his desk in a flurry of high school romantic.
You showed
Here
him.
you go. Yeah, here you go. But, for me, back to the music of my compatriots when I got to college that was the real education, or another education for me. I got to go get involved with all this stuff that was not available to me, So I was like a kid in a candy store there, I loved it.
Was there anything going on in New Haven at the time as far as live music that appealed to you?
No, but there was one good club, Toads. And so a lot of touring acts, would come through. So I did get to see a fair amount of music. There was a little bit of a jazz scene. A cat named Jerry Hemingway was playing around town. And the great part was the school itself brought in enormously good music. Max Roach was teaching there. Robert Palmer, the writer, I took a class from him. And Walter Davis's father, Charles Davis, was the master of the particular, college that I was in. So he brought in Muddy Waters, and we saw a lot of and David Murray, and Sonny Murray, the avant-garde players from that late 70s period. So we got to see an enormous amount of cool music. As far as the scene in New Haven, I didn't really know about it. I was kind of busy with my own little school scene, I guess.
Did you get to spend any time with Max Roach?
Yeah, we did. Well, enough. He liked to talk, and it was sort of that Mad Max period, goddamn South Africa. I got excited because I wanted to tell you one of the things he said in an off-the-cuff moment, standing around a bunch of us listening to him like God, in the hallway one day. He said, if you really love music, don't study it.
I think that can be true.
I think it can be too. I mean, I don't know if you experience these things, but around Boston, Berkeley graduates are a dime a dozen, But
I went there for a couple of years. I'm not one of the dime a dozen graduates because I only stayed for 2 years. But
I always looked at that as a sign of good health.
Well, for me, it was interesting because I looked at it like a great opportunity. I had an opportunity to go there, and I got a scholarship as well. And I think it screwed me up. I think it made me doubt my inner voice. But I got a lot of great information. There's good and bad that came out of it in my case.
Yeah, I think that's a sign of good health. You were seeing those things too, because any one of us who didn't get that kind of training wishes they did.
Yes, I think so I don't disparage it, but I recognize it for what it was. One thing I've noticed on this show is that people that go to art school for visual arts tend to make great musicians.
Wow. Yeah, I could see it. And I think there's a sort of a trope among all of us that so many poets desperately want to be musicians. I know a lot of poets these days, and all of them want to play. And I think, and writers too. And I think that's because with music, and when you play live, you get immediate gratification, which is something you don't get. And you also get to do it with other people, which is something that poetry is not, particularly good at. So I think all of us have other arts we want to be, but I like the visual art thing. I think you're right.
Well, anyway, I think Max was kind of right when he said that. Although I think he did. I think he's speaking from experience because I think he went back and studied too. And of course, he was saying this in an academic setting. It's just a weird thing that happened with jazz, where it inevitably became something that people in academia latched onto and codified in a way that almost negated the original intention.
Very articulate. Yeah, absolutely. And have you read this new book, The Subversive History of Music by Ted Goya?
No, I'd love to check it out.
Oh man, it's a tome, but the book is about the music we didn't hear, and that how the middle always usurps the music from the edges, which what brings it to life, and then we codify it, beat it up, and then make it stale, and we keep looking to the edges, and it's like a history of the importance of the music we didn't hear. And it's really pretty fascinating book. Once you get his point, he beats it up over and over, but it's very academic. So, he explains how the edges influenced the opera and then he makes exactly the same point about jazz.
Right. I mean, the reason why it's such an intellectual art form is it's important to look at the context in which it emerged. When the people that came up with it didn't want to do this shucking and jiving bullshit, so they created an ultra intellectual art form. But if that's the only thing you're getting out of it is that it's complicated and that you want to study the complexities of it, then you're missing the underlying spirit of it.
Right, exactly. And then also comes into play the Henny Youngman quote about if the people don't laugh, the joke's not funny.
Right.
And so I think very often with jazz, you had those jazz heads who were like, oh, nobody understands my music. And I was like, well, apparently you didn't deliver it in a way they could understand it and lead them to what you want them to hear, Yeah, and I think these are really, really weird times. I have a whole theory that, if you look from a historical point of view, anytime there's cultural upheaval, it's often followed by cultural stasis. So if you look at the 60s, for example, and all of the energy and the movement and the technology and all that brought together and the power and the enthusiasm, that was a huge cultural shift, followed by of course, led the way by all of the great music and art that was going on. And then we figured out that we could sell all that. And we're still listening to the same music that sprouted then, which I despise nostalgia. And I think it's artists' responsibility to turn the wheel a little bit all the time. And I think we, have been... I used to think, man, it'll be great someday to put on an old Led Zeppelin record and take a walk down memory lane. That'll be great. But I don't even care anymore. The shit's been jammed down my throat, other than all the new weird stuff coming out thanks to YouTube and all those things. But just culturally, I think we've been living in the past too long. Sometimes I would give drum lessons. I'm on a tirade, but this is kind of an important thing for me. And you have a 15-year-old and you'll say, so what do you listen to? And he will say, well, John Bonham and Pink Floyd. And I would go, that's really great. But you're 15 years old. You should have just listed 6 bands I've never heard of playing music I don't like. That's the job of rock and roll, is to keep moving and to keep turning the wheel, not to be, and then as a player, of course, you look back and you go, oh man, this is where this comes from. What's the quote, great artists, steal, or good artists borrow, great artists, you take a riff or you take a piece of something you've learned in your past historically, and then you try and make something new of it. I think that,
Sometimes you don't
art,
even try to make something new of it. You're trying to
no.
replicate it and you fail into something new.
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of people that go, Black Sabbath was just a bad blues band trying to do their thing. So whatever the case, as long as you're trying to turn the wheel, I'm all for it. I have no room for nostalgia. I really, I think it's unhealthy for culture.
Yeah.
There are moments when you sing, will the circle be unbroken? There are sacred things. There are those things. But basically, as artists, our job is to turn the wheel.
Right. And the other thing to keep in mind is, I mean, I feel like since you brought his name up earlier, someone like Max Roach, pretty much the entirety of his catalog is sacred to me. But what's the difference between, relating to something that's just as vital as it was 50 years ago and nostalgia, in your view?
I think as an artist is you relate to it, and Jesus, man, I listen to those records still. I mean, and I learn every single time. But I hope that what I'm learning is how to take what I'm gleaning from it as I become, as I get older, and you hear the music differently, or you hear things you didn't understand before, or whatever the case. My my deepest hope is that I am listening in a way that I am now incorporating it into how I play.
Right. It's
And
acknowledging this notion that you're an active participant when you're listening to an album. You're bringing whatever experiences you're that are under your belt to the record as you're listening to it. It's not a dead piece of wax. It becomes alive when you're listening to it and engaging
oh
with it.
yeah, absolutely, man. And I've been on a Art Blakey binge lately, because you can, and a Tommy Artolino binge. That guy was in a whole other world.
Put a record on the table. The light's always perfect just before it fades. Bow your head down when you break bread together. Close your eyes.
Where were you teaching in Boston?
Down in Hyde Park.
Are there any memories or experiences from that time that still inform the way you see the world?
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. That was Hyde Park was where the white and black worlds collided. Hyde Park was very white, and Dorchester and Roxbury butted up against it, and busing had really affected Boston. So it was racially charged. The school we worked at, and stuff that you would think was all over was not. There was heavy racism. But the spirit of those kids, and at that time, the music, Grandmaster Flash had just started to happen. And I remember, these kids were playing music for us that we'd never heard. So we incorporated a little music program where everybody got to bring in music to have other people hear. And then we expanded it to bring in music you don't like, and we'll all discuss why. But Prince had just started to happen, and the kids would stand in a circle at lunchtime, smoking cigarettes and slamming out the beat to When Doves Cry, by stomping their feet and clapping their hands. It was powerful.
Do you feel like you were good at your job?
Yeah, I do. It took me a little bit. I didn't have a lot of experience, and I got thrown into the deep end.
I mean, it seems like part of it is figuring out how to relate to people that have a completely different background from, the way you were raised.
Absolutely. And I learned so much about that. One of the first things I learned was that, I was teaching all day, and I was sometimes even coaching a little hockey. And then at night we'd go to rehearsals, and I would rehearse till midnight and get up and be back teaching at 8 in the morning or on gigs, if I'd get home late. at 3 or something, I'd have to be at school at 8. And then I would look at these kids and go, he slept in the dumpster last night and he's here and he's got a smile on his face. I can do this, you know? I found inspiration in them, you know? No, and I learned a lot. And I learned a lot about race as well as, you know, the influence of money, really. The scale, you know, it doesn't matter what color you're in. When you're born into that environment, it's hard to get out. It's really fucking hard.
You know, the sad thing is I don't think that the education system is any better funded today, and if anything, it's worse off.
Oh, it's worse. I think if you look at charter schools, for example, when, you know, there are plenty of democracies that have failed. So there are signposts of what happens as democracies go down. One of the signposts of a failing democracy is when the public gives up on public education. And that's what we've done.
Well, I live in a neighborhood in the LA area, Pasadena, where the average house, and most of these houses are, you know, either there's a range, but in my neighborhood, it's mostly like 1920s small homes, but now they're worth over $1 million each on average, and the public school system in this neighborhood is supposedly terrible. How can that be, you know?
Right. And I don't believe there's an educator on the planet that would tell you if you want to change the state of urban life in America, you put the best school in the worst neighborhood. That's how you do it. We all know that.
Yeah.
But that's not what we do.
Yeah, it's not as complicated as it's being made out to be, right?
Yeah. I don't think Betsy DeVos is going to like figure it out for us.
Yeah, it's so sad. But I mean, like you said, I mean, it's the reason why someone like Trump is even electable in the first place is a symptom of a failed educational system. Like people don't have the ability to vote with their rational minds, and hence we wind up with the people we wind up with.
Yeah, and you know, I don't know if you read Christopher Hedges at all, but I think he's pretty much nailed it. It's like, yeah, Trump is a problem, but the truth of the matter is he's a symptom, and we're all complicit on some degree of how we let that symptom become, you know, the head of the, you know, wealthiest nation in the world.
Well, even a story like yours, where you grew up in a working class family and went to public school and were able to go to an Ivy League school. I mean, that was extraordinary back in the 70s, but I think it's even more difficult to do that now. And we're hearing
You are dead on right. I just talked to an old pal of mine in back in Owatonna, and I said, what I worry about is a kid like me in that town today. If you want to be in the band, you have to pay to be in the band. You got to pay for your lessons. And if you want to play hockey, you have to pay to be on the hockey team. And my parents wouldn't have been able to do that. So I think about how, even though they've got a new school and they've got all these things, I'm not sure the opportunities, I know the opportunities are not the same for a kid like me. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, that is jarring.
You were the second drummer of Morphine, but the one with the longest tenure in the band. How did you meet those other guys?
Well, Mark Sandman was in a band with me in Treat Her Right. He was in that band. And Dana, the sax player from Morphine, was ostensibly part of our road crew. But he was just a good friend, helped us out and went on the road and then brought his saxophone. So he was the guts of Morphine were actually in Treat Her Right at a certain point. So when Treat Her Right broke up and then, you know, we all backed away, Sandman started Morphine with Jerome. And I was kind of in the wings. And then Jerome got sick. And so I took over his gigs for him and said, whenever you're ready and you can come back. Well, he never got really ready, and he played a few shows, but then he still wasn't able to tour or do anything, so that's when I took over. So there was a lot of interplay for all of us, you know, along the way there. But at the end of the day, I played on all the records. I'm on every record. And Jerome played on the first two and then came back and we played the last one together. And, there were some bumpy times in there, but we all worked it out. Jerome and I were friends before Morphine, so he was one of the first drummer friends I had in Boston.
What did that band represent to you?
Well, we were just a rock and roll band. And we used limitations sonically to, I think, inspire creativity and to force simplicity. And really, it was just about the song. Sandman was a great songwriter, really, really good songwriter. And we delivered the songs. It's just we kind of used different instruments to do it. But if you really, one of the things we were most proud of was when it was all over, other people can play those songs. Everybody thought it was just unique to the slide bass and Sandman's ride delivery and the saxophone, but you just pick up an acoustic guitar and play those songs and you realize they're really well-written songs. And that, to me, is, isn't that what you're after?
Right, to write timeless songs but deliver it in a singular fashion.
You got it, yeah. And we had it was a great band to be in. We were flexible and we could move swiftly and it didn't take a lot to tour, and we could improvise because it was only a trio. It was, if somebody wanted to take a left turn, you didn't need a comptroller to go, okay, so we're playing the bridge again, gotcha. It was not that hard, so we were flexible in that way and we used it to our advantage. And because we were delivering it in a different way, using different instruments, we kind of we had to be dealt with on our own. It wasn't like, oh, this is just like this other record that these other people made. We had to be dealt with on our own terms, So this record, is it any good? Well, what do you compare it to? All you can compare it to is, do you like it more than the last record, So I think that gave us a lot of leeway, And we never had a record company or anybody breathing down our throats because they didn't know what to tell us to do. It was a freak show, what we were doing, but it was working. So even when we got to DreamWorks, they kind of left us alone. Said, you guys apparently seem to know what you're doing, so we'll get out of the way.
Who brought you into DreamWorks?
Well, we got sold. There was a lot of publicity. I hope you didn't bother to take any of it, but Rykodisc sold us to DreamWorks. We still owed Rykodisc records, and we weren't happy there, but it wasn't our choice. So when DreamWorks became interested and said, we're thinking of trying to get you out of your contract, we're like, great, we're not happy at Rykodisc, but we owe them. So at the end of the day, we got sold like a baseball player to a different team, but, there was a lot of, stuff on the street that we'd lost our indie credibility and all that. And the truth of the matter was, Ryko lost their credibility. They were the ones that sold us, So it didn't really, to us it didn't matter. We just kind of were doing our thing. And it was a new opportunity with new people, so that was all good,
How would you describe your creative role in the band?
I think, one of the things you learn over time, especially as a drummer, is how to help make the ship float. What's it need, and how do you help make that happen? Learning to be a good band member, I think, is an important part of it, And
what does that mean to you? Like, how would you define a good band member?
Well, I think being supportive to the song, number one, and doggedly so that it's not about people's feelings or things like that. We're professionals. Does this work? And if you can keep that as your prize, then you can deal with the other stuff. Because the goal is what, is coming out of those speakers or off that stage. Is it what we want, and does it work? So then being a good band member is, it was a nice band because Dana and I were not, we didn't want the light on us. I don't have those skills. And I think in order to be a successful operation, you have to have somebody that wants the light on them, who thinks that they should be at the microphone. And Dana and I were not like that. So, and Sandman was. So that was all good. It wasn't like we were vying for airtime. So I think that was part of it. You learn that role, and we were happy with that. So I just think it's a little bit like whether you're playing music or not, how you relate to each other is, that's what makes good relationships. It's also what makes good music.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you could argue that music is just an offshoot of that relationship.
I think so. I mean, that was the Coltrane's take on it. You're a better player when you're a better human. And so you work on those things, and, if you can make those things happen. I mean, I like to be a team player. When you play drums, as Levon says, it's good to have friends.
Yeah, I've heard some people say that playing drums alone is kind of like dancing alone.
Well, right. And, the only essential element is rhythm, right? Otherwise, we're good to go. So I think, it's sort of like being the catcher. You get to see the ball on every play.
How would you describe your confidence during this time when you were playing with Morphine? Like, for example, if you heard playback when you were making a record, what was your inner monologue like?
Oh, man, it's so much fun to grow up, because when you're young and you're making records and like all you can hear is what you didn't do, and you can't get out of your own way when you're listening to playback. And, I really do wish I had more confidence in those days rather than just, it's just experience, really, of learning to do it and getting better at it. And there's no other way to get better than to do it, I suppose.
So at the time, you were more kind of judgmental of yourself?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I for a long time, I was like of the ilk of like, you can't really listen to what you do objectively for 10 years. And then that's when you stop reaching for a fader or wondering why you put that ridiculous fill there that did nothing, No, it takes a long time to get over that and to have the confidence of going, that's what happened today. Good snapshot, So it takes a long time, I think. It took me a long time to be able to hear a good track. And one of the best lessons was on a Treat or Write record. We'd learned a James Blood Ulmer cover the night before the session, and it was loose, really loose. And we tracked it for the session. And when we were done, the other fellas wanted to put it on the record. And I pleaded for them to not put it on the record, And all these years later, when I hear that track, I love that track. Because we were making it up, and we didn't know that the bridge was coming yet, or whatever, And that looseness was there. But it was that I was so out on a limb when we were tracking it. So I think you just learn those things. And it's, you don't hear yourself very well. And I'm kind of glad, even to this day, when I, get work on a record and then, the mixes get sent, and I still listen to myself with, an eye for, boy, I could have, it would have been really good if I'd have done this, And so, but I enjoy that. I enjoy that learning,
I live like a beast most days. Family, no feast. I live like a beast. Outside, inside, I try to lose myself and not to hide. To tell the truth and for this I lie.
I was just thinking of the Janine Garofalo quote about these youngsters don't have the decency for self-loathing.
I've always felt, as somebody who's had a fair share of self-loathing, I was always a little suspicious of people that didn't have it. But now it's like an ambition of mine to kind of strip it away because I see it for what it is, which is just an extension of ego.
Yeah. Yep. Well, right. Yeah. I mean, and it's, to bring it to this speed lately, this past year when I was locked down before the pandemic, we made a record of some of my music, and I've never had my name on the marquee. I've never had to, I had tons of snippets of songs, none I'd ever really finished because I never had to deliver them. So making a record was, really informative for me. And, I produced a lot of records, but there's part of me that was going, boy, no producer should be allowed to produce till he makes a solo record.
I made my first solo record last year too, so I'm interested to know, how did it feel, vulnerability-wise?
I think that part of it mostly boils down to singing. I didn't, at a certain point in my career, I used to love to sing, and then at a certain point it stopped. And when I started to do some more singing again, I wasn't able to tap into the joy.
What were you tapping into instead?
That I wasn't a very good singer.
So you were judging yourself.
Oh, God, yeah. And then, you just slowly try and let loose. And my partner was Lori. She's was engineering, producing, and hand-holding. Sometimes she was, have to kick my ass, and other times she would sweetly cajole me into trying it a different way or something. So, but it was just all a really good learning process. And I really did enjoy it. And at the same time, I was also in the middle of, I was doing chemo. So there were some days I could record, some days I couldn't, and sometimes I'd do overdubs and not recall doing them and all that. But I enjoyed the process. But I think, the last, really since Morphine, my career has been about singer-songwriters and producing those things, and then playing with Jeff and Chris Smither and doing the duo thing and really exploring songwriting was what I've been doing for a number of years. So it was fun to explore that as well.
What is your mission when you're supporting a singer-songwriter, say if you're producing an album for one?
It's all about the song. And I was really adamant about, as a producer or a record shepherd, whatever role you were playing, was that once you have a track and when you're listening back, it no longer matters how anybody feels. It's, you now kneel to what's coming out of the speakers. Is this good? Can we work with it? The moment the artist says, well, that's not how it's supposed to go, I was like, well, turn everything off. None of us know supposed to go. I don't know what that means. It's in your head. And if you haven't articulated it and it didn't translate, then that's a different problem. We'll go back to the floor and we'll work. But if we're just going to listen to what's coming out, my job as a producer is to go, this works. I think we can work with this. And so you're no longer, assuaging somebody's ego, or they're trying to, build them up, give them confidence, whatever the case may be. All you're doing is listening and going, I think we can work with this, or not. And I think that it really became about the song. I'm really of the ilk of, there's that great Levon quote, where he says, well, you don't play your instrument, you play the song. So, I've really enjoyed these past number of years, playing with really good songwriters, people that are dedicated to it, and that can really deliver. And that, I think, is, really an inspiration for me. So, these past 8 years or so, I've toured probably at least 60% of the gigs I've been doing on a suitcase with a lowboy cymbal and a bizarre Remo snare drum and a little 14-inch cymbal, and that's it. But what it's really forced me to do is to explore the song, and when you're playing with a singer-songwriter such as Jeffrey or Smither, the song is going to happen with or without you. The bar is low. Your job is just don't ruin it. But it also leaves you wide open to how can I explore to take this somewhere a little different, Or what can I do as a drummer without a bass player or any other accoutrements as the one part of a duo? And that exploration has really been informative for me.
One thing that you just said that's really interesting is the song is going to happen with or without you. And I think you could even extend that all the way to even if you are a singer-songwriter, you could think of the song as something external. It's something that comes to people. It's going to happen with or without you. And so that's, when we go back to what you said, when people get hung up on how something is supposed to sound, it's almost like they're disregarding the song's intention. Like the song has an intention of its own.
Yeah. Yes, sirree. And well put. Yeah. And that, we've, I think, misguided ourselves into thinking it's all from inside out. I think it's kind of from outside in. The David Byrne theory that the music is dictated by the context.
Yeah, I mean, I've just, with people that have been on this show in the last couple of weeks, they've referred to it as panning for gold or going fishing. It's all, metaphors that point to, being a songwriter is actually like being a great fisher. You can develop the skill, but you are relying on nature to provide,
Yeah. Right, and you hone those skills, those of observation, those of listening. You hone those skills into a readiness. But when you hook that fish, or when you get, when those things happen, the Jim Harrison theory was that you go to work every day, and not every day provides great work, but you got to be ready, and you have to be on your game.
Right.
And I think that. And then, watching songwriters that, just learn how to whittle those words down, and same with the changes.
So you said earlier that if you're going to produce records for other people, it's helpful to have made a solo album first. What have you learned from being the person on the other side of the glass that could inform the way that you produce moving forward?
I think having it gives you a better ear towards what's needed at the moment. Do you need to provide some confidence, or do you need to get a little sarcastic and tell them to step up to the plate? Learning to read the relationship you have going in the way to bring it out, to bring the stuff out. And get the problems out of the way. And if the problem is insecurity, then how do you do that? Or if the problem is arrogance, how do you do that? But I think that is learning how to foster those relationships. I did most of my records solo, but when you're working with an ensemble, I think it's the same thing. It's like how do you get everybody on the same page?
Conversely, were there things that you learned from producing other people that you could employ when you were making a record for yourself? Were you able to achieve some sort of distance that maybe you wouldn't have?
Yes. Yeah. No, that experience came into play regularly, and one of the things I learned early on is when I was becoming a studio rat was a great guitar player named Duke Levine, Boston guy. Reminded me one day when we were working with a singer-songwriter that we were sort of like the wrecking crew of the studio. We were doing lots of different records, same band every day. And he reminded me that for those of us that come in and play every day, it's okay sometimes when there's a track and you're just not getting it. And instead of beating it up for hours, the experienced people in the room go, you know what? Let's just get her tomorrow, or let's do it after dinner. But let's just get that. We're only hurting ourselves and the song at this point. And he reminded me that for those experienced players, we all know that's the way to do it. You know, we're not getting it. Let's back off. We either got to change something drastically to get us in, back in the right place. But the singer-songwriter, he only goes in the studio once every 2 years.
Right.
And they're usually terrified because it's the studio, whereas those of us are just like, yeah, we do this every day. And so to become aware of that was an important lesson all along. Was like, yeah, they're on 11 because, they're paying for this time and they just fucked up. They know the song and they, so all those kinds of things are into play. And, they don't have the fallback that, the players in the room have, which is, yeah, we'll get it tomorrow. Let's not just, nobody needs to get hot under the collar here. Let's just pull back. And realizing that for the singer-songwriter, that is not as easy. Even though it's the right thing to do, they don't know that. They want to keep beating the song up,
Well, it's something that's been building up for months as they've been preparing to record this material.
Yeah.
You've alluded to this a few times, but you have cancer.
Yes, I do.
What kind of cancer do you have?
I have colorectal cancer, and then I had prostate cancer, and I did chemo and radiation for one whole round. And then I went back out in the world and started to work again, and then they discovered that the cancer had found my liver, so I'm back in treatment again.
What's the prognosis right now?
It's called manageable, so it's stage 4 manageable. So if they can get it under control, then there will be certain drugs that I will be on for the rest of my dance card. And the dance card could go long or it could go short. So, yeah, it started out as stage 3 curable and then found its way to stage 4 manageable.
And how is it affecting the way that you're viewing your time right now?
Well, this process that I'm going through with this illness is, and I've tried to describe it, but it reminds me of our idea of what it must be like to swing through the jungle on a vine. And you grab hold and you swing and you get up to the apex of whatever vine that is, and then you grab onto the next one and you let the one behind go because it's a sort of arduous path. So I feel like, I swing through, a period, and then I latch on to the next vine and I go for that. And each day is different. The Midwesterner in me is very powerful. I need to work. It just makes me feel good. And one of the things I think about that's hard is like, I can't just go work for a day and feel okay. I can't count on that. Mm-hmm. So some days I feel good. Like today I was out working in the greenhouse and my body feels good. And then yesterday, basically, I couldn't do much. So the vine metaphor comes in. It's like, depends on which vine you get in the morning. Am I going to have something that I can work with all day, or am I just going to have to coddle myself and try and take it easy? And I find that's one of the most difficult. The decisions about, or the feelings about mortality and all that, it's a different vine, really. You just swing each day. And as I'm now at the 6th cycle of the 2nd round of chemo, and then they'll do scans and see what condition my condition is, and then we'll develop the next leg of the journey, from that. And that's about as much as you can hope for, other than, trying to really stay near the ones you love and participate in the things you love and be supportive of those around you, you know?
I mean, humans are an interesting species in that we're aware of our impending mortality from an early age. And I feel like lots of human behavior and society and structures can be described by our desire to forget about our mortality.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But just as you were
Yeah.
talking about before with morphine, where you were using restrictions and narrowing down choices to create, beautiful music out of those restrictions and those limitations. It's like knowing that you're going to die and that it might happen sooner than later. That's like the biggest limitation of all, right? It's literally your limit as a human being on this planet.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And culturally, we don't spend much time, and not that I don't consider it morbid. It's nobody gets out alive. But I think,
I mean, now lots of the people that have been on this show are experiencing heightened levels of existential dread because of this pandemic. But the thing that's important to remember is we're not the times that we're in now are not any more uncertain than be prior to the pandemic. It's just more externalized and obvious now, and it's in the news.
yeah, 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 everything's on 11 in regard to that. And, I think this is a reset button and an opportunity. And we kind of don't have a choice. We might as well reset and try and think through some of this, how we are going to respond. And, there, in my estimation, there won't be a normal. It'll be a new normal, just like the weather,
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be new, and we should embrace that. And we should embrace that with notions that we can do better than what we're doing. We really can.
How are you feeling emotionally?
I think that I'm a blessed human being. The community of music, I'll just back up and tell you this. One of the things that I would tell at Berkeley, the working musician, I would say, here's the deal. When you're 18 and you're getting into this, field of endeavor, everybody does it for different reasons. Some people just think they're a genius and they need the light and the microphone. Others, really have a love and a passion for it and exploring. And some people are just trying to get laid. Whatever your reasons are when you're 18 are good enough as long as it motivates you. What you don't know when you're 18, that you know when you're 63, is that the best thing to come of it, no matter what kind of success you had, is the people that you meet and you play with over the years, like we spoke earlier. It's like a conversation. So I'll do a record with Bo Ramsey, and we've known each other and loved each other for a long time. And I won't see Bo for 3 years. And then we will play somewhere together, and the conversation just picks up exactly where it left off. But in being in music all the years, you have this giant community of like-minded, caring people. So when I start to go through all this with the cancer stuff, I wrote in the liner notes for my record, when I found out I was sick, I also found out I was lucky. I'm lucky to be surrounded by the kind of people that I am, that have been around me for all these years now. There's only one way to gather that, and that is to do it.
And that's kind of the original function of music, to bring
Absolutely.
people together. I mean, and I'm glad that it's brought us together. I mean, tangentially, because 20-something years ago, I played on an album with a guy named Jeffrey Foucault. Now you've been working with him. And, it really did bring us together, like in a literal sense.
Absolutely.
Today.
And you will find that over and over again. That's why I remember doing a record with G Love, and the producer, God, I can't, his name's not right on the tip of my tongue. But we were having dinner, and he and I were the oldest guys in the room, and we were telling stories, where we'd been, who we knew, that kind of stuff, songs we liked. And G was a young punk at the time, and he was like, all you guys just tell stories. And the producer looked at me and he goes, G, at the end of the day, that's all we are, is just a story.
That's true. Like even the notion of being a person is an abstraction. It's a story, right? Like something's distinctive and separate, like discrete, something different from the rest of the universe. That's a story.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a little bit like being an individual. We raise the cause of individualism to these hedonistic heights when really an individual, the word actually means nothing unless it's in the context of a community. And if it's not in the context of a community, then what you really are is just fucking lonely.
Are you afraid?
No. I don't mean to be cavalier. Of course, there's fear of the unknown. That's always happened. But I know something's going to happen. I know what that is. No, I don't live with a kind of dread about it. Like I say, I think the real path is in realizing how lucky I am.
That's beautiful. Well, Billy Conway, thank you so much for being on the show.
I can't wait to meet you, Joe, in real life.
The Trap Set is produced by me, Joe Wong, along with Chris Karwowski, who also edits the program. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The Trap Set, and visit our website, thetrapset.net, to subscribe to our show for free. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please donate to our show. If you can't afford to donate, please tell a friend and give us a good rating on iTunes. Send your feedback and guest requests to thetrapset@gmail.com.